So let's talk about what's actually happening with Social Security, because this planned increase is one of the most important developments for millions of Americans heading into 2026. A lot of people hear COLA or cost of living adjustment and kind of tune out, either because it sounds technical or because they assume it doesn't really make a huge difference. But that mindset is a mistake, especially this year. There are some very specific dates and economic signals that are pointing toward what could be a meaningful shift in monthly Social Security checks. And if you're already on Social Security, or if you expect to file for benefits within the next several months, this affects you directly. Not next year, not down the line. This is happening right now, and the impacts are going to be felt starting in early 2026. So whether you're living on a fixed income or just trying to understand what this all means for your retirement, it's time to pay close attention. Let's just get straight to it. The Social Security Administration bases its annual cost of living adjustment, again, that's COLA, on inflation numbers. Specifically, they use the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, which is abbreviated as CPI-W. It's not the CPI that most people hear about on the news, which is a slightly different version called CPI-U. But what matters is that the COLA is calculated based solely on the average CPI-W during the months of July, August, and September. Not the whole year, not even the first half of the year, just that one 3-month window in the third quarter. That's it. Those are the numbers that determine how much, if at all, Social Security recipients will see their checks go up starting in January. That's why, right now, all eyes are on what's happening with inflation heading into mid-July. Because even though inflation has cooled down a lot compared to the wild spikes we saw a couple years ago, it's still sticking around, and some economists are warning that new pressures, especially from global trade policies, could push prices up again just when the government is doing this calculation. If inflation ticks up during these next few months, that's going to translate directly into a higher COLA. If inflation stays low, well, the increase could be modest or even disappointing, depending on your expectations. Now, if you're wondering how big the increase is shaping up to be, right now the early projections are somewhere between 2.6% and 2.9%. That might not sound like a lot, but let's put it in real-world terms. The average monthly Social Security retirement benefit right now is about $1,900. A 2.7% increase would add just over $50 a month to that check. Over the course of a year, that's an extra $600, enough to cover groceries for a month or two, or help offset rising utility bills, or maybe just give a little cushion for emergencies. And if inflation keeps creeping up, which is still possible given all the global and domestic pressures we're seeing, that COLA could go even higher. Some analysts are saying it's not out of the question that we could see a 3% adjustment if the next few CPI reports come in hotter than expected. That brings us to the first really important date to watch, July 15th. That's when the government releases the inflation report for the month of June. Now, to be clear, the June data itself does not get used in the COLA calculation. Like I said earlier, only July through September counts. But the June numbers are going to set the tone. They'll tell us whether prices are rising, falling, or holding steady. And, more importantly, they'll shape expectations for the months that do count. If the June report shows inflation jumping up unexpectedly, that's a strong signal that July might come in hot as well. And that means the COLA calculation could be heading upward. Then comes the July CPI report, which will be released in mid-August. That one does count. It will be the first of the 3 data points used to calculate the 2026 COLA. After that, August's inflation report comes out in mid-September, and September's data gets released in mid-October. Once all 3 numbers are in, the Social Security Administration does a very specific calculation using the average of those 3 months compared to the same period the previous year. The result of that formula becomes the official COLA percentage for 2026. It's usually announced in the second week of October, and it takes effect for payments issued in January. So basically, we are in that critical stretch right now. These next few months, starting with July, are make or break for the size of next year's Social Security increase. And it's not just inflation that's affecting these numbers. Trade policy is having a big impact as well. Former President Trump recently announced plans to impose steep new tariffs on imports from Brazil and on certain pharmaceuticals. If these tariffs go into effect, or if even the threat of them causes supply chains to react, that could push prices up for a lot of everyday goods and services. That, in turn, could show up in the CPI numbers and influence the COLA outcome. It's a chain reaction, and it can happen quickly. For example, if tariffs make it more expensive for drug companies to import ingredients, that cost gets passed down the line to pharmacies and ultimately to consumers. The same is true for vehicles. Cars are already expensive, and if tariffs raise the cost of aluminum or steel, we could see prices tick up even more. Then there's housing. While home prices have been mixed around the country, we are now starting to see mortgage rates decline slightly. That might sound like a good thing, but it could spur more people to buy homes, which increases demand and pushes prices higher. And when home prices go up, rent often follows. All of that feeds into the inflation calculation and therefore the COLA. So when you put it all together, the trade tension, the housing market shifts, the consumer behavior around travel and big-ticket purchases, you can see that this Social Security increase isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger economic story. And for people who rely on those benefits to get by each month, the outcome of this story matters a lot. Another element that doesn't get enough attention is what happens if the COLA is too small to keep up with actual cost increases. This is a big concern for fixed-income seniors who are already struggling with higher food, transportation, and medical costs. A 2.7% bump might not be enough to bridge the gap, especially if inflation is still running above that level in real life, regardless of what the CPI shows. And the way CPI is calculated doesn't always reflect the spending patterns of older Americans. For example, seniors often spend a larger portion of their income on health care, which tends to rise faster than other prices. So even if inflation moderates overall, seniors may still feel the squeeze if the COLA isn't keeping pace with their actual expenses. That's why groups like the Senior Citizens League are calling attention to these issues and putting pressure on lawmakers and the Social Security Administration to consider alternative or supplemental measures. There's been talk over the years of switching from CPIW to a different index that more accurately tracks inflation for seniors, such as CPI-E, E for elderly. But so far, that change hasn't happened. Still, it's part of the broader debate about how to make Social Security more responsive and sustainable over the long term. Of course, none of this happens in a political vacuum either. As we get closer to the 2026 benefit year, we're also entering another election season, and Social Security is always a hot topic on the campaign trail. Some candidates will talk about expanding benefits, while others focus on reducing costs or raising the retirement age. But one thing is certain. Any changes to the COLA formula or to how Social Security is funded in general will have major implications for tens of millions of Americans. That's why staying informed and keeping track of these dates and announcements is more important than ever. It's also important to remember that the COLA is just one piece of the Social Security puzzle. There are still long-term solvency questions about the trust fund, which is projected to face shortfalls in the coming decade unless Congress takes action. But for now, the COLA is one of the only mechanisms built into the program that ensures benefits rise, at least somewhat, with inflation. It's not perfect, and it may not be enough for everyone, but it's something. And this year's adjustment is going to be especially important as Americans continue to deal with a cost of living crisis that hasn't really gone away, even if inflation has cooled a bit on paper. So, if you're someone who's already receiving Social Security, or if you're planning to file soon, mark your calendar. July 15. mid-August, mid-September, mid-October. These are the key dates when we'll get the CPI reports that will ultimately decide how much your monthly benefit goes up in 2026. The final number will likely be announced in October, and once that happens, the Social Security Administration will begin mailing out notices later in the year, letting people know what their new benefit amount will be starting in January. And if you're one of those people who counts on Social Security as a major part of your income, this is your time to pay close attention. The COLA might seem like just a routine adjustment, but in times like these, where every dollar matters, it could make a significant difference. It's also a reminder of how closely our personal finances are tied to broader economic forces, things like inflation, trade policy, and interest rates that most of us don't control, but that affect us in very real ways. That's why I'll be watching these reports closely and sharing updates as soon as they come out. Because knowing what to expect and when to expect it can help you plan better and stay ahead of the curve. So keep an eye out for those CPI releases, stay informed, and if you have questions, don't be afraid to ask. This stuff can feel overwhelming sometimes, but you're not alone. A lot of people are in the same boat, trying to navigate retirement or semi-retirement in an uncertain economy. And the more we understand what's going on, the better positioned we'll be to make smart decisions going forward. Thanks again for following along. Be sure to check back as we get those inflation numbers and start to see how things are shaping up for the 2026 COLA. There's a lot more to come in the weeks ahead, and I'll be right here to break it all down.